Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Hager number 1750. This is a 3.5 by 3.5 size, single-acting spring hinge, full mortise residential weight, and steel base is what it is. The 1750 is the residential version of the spring hinge series from Hager. They make naturally a commercial grade. They're 1250 and its variants. In the residential realm, you have 1750, part of a family of 5 other spring hinges. They're available in 3.5, 3.5, or 4x4. Here's the bottom line. The image that you're seeing above is certainly not a 3.5, 3.5 hinge because it has 4 holes in the hinge leaf. The problem that we have is they don't show an image of a 3.5, 3.5. The 4x4 must have that staggered pattern. So what I'm trying to say is, be mindful. If you've got a hinge with 4 holes, you don't have a 3.5 inch tall hinge. If you've got one with 3 hinges, if you have a hinge with 3 holes, you don't have a 4-inch hinge. Why that's the case? That's just because how hinges are done. So this is a 3.5-inch version, so it will visually look different than the image that's there. My point is they don't create artwork, or I'm unable to find artwork of a 3.5-inch version, so we're using the one for a 4-inch version that's there. The 1750 is a steel-based hinge with square corners. That's in the description. This is US 15. This would be more accurately called 646 finish. That means US 15 means satin nickel. That doesn't tell you the base material. 646 would be satin nickel, but it would tell us the base material is steel and that it has a clear coat on it as well. Satin nickel, when it's made of brass, would be 619, and you would not have a brass-based spring hinge like this. Okay. Now, let's get into the extended description down below this video. Right now, currently, these hinges must be purchased in multiples of 2, even though they're priced per hinge. Hinges are almost always priced per hinge. Not in all instances, but in almost all. Unless it's specifically noted that a hinge is sold per pair or a box of 3 or, you know, a gaggle's worth. They're priced per hinge. This is a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaf here that the hinge is meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame to maintain that margin between the leaves. Okay. This is a steel-based hinge. Its thickness is .097. 097 literally means residential weight. You've got residential weight, which is about 097. You've got commercial weight, which is about, well, in this hinge, it'd be about 123 thousandths thick. Then you have heavyweight, which don't exist in 3.5-inch hinges, and that would be about 180 thousandths if it did exist. So residential weight means residential applications where the leaf is the thinnest that you'll be able to get your hands on. This does have 6 holes in this sort of half moon or template style pattern. Does include screws. They are certainly supplying all wood screws. These are fly cut wood screws. Fly cut is a reference to how that detail or that slot is done there. That's done to permit an evacuation of the wood out of the opening, out of the jamb or out of the door, skipping the need, believe it or not, to pre-drill holes in the door and frame, and that's exactly where those are used. Okay. Now, of course, I'm not a fan of not pre-drilling holes for hinges, but fly-cut screws are meant in automated processes where the screws are being fed from a hopper through pneumatic tubes right to the machinery, and it's being put in very quick, fast, and without any concern over splitting the jamb. In my experience, well, I don't put in screws without pre-drilling holes, but the fly cut is intended to allow you to cut those threads on the fly. Is how I understand it. So this is a spring hinge. This is going to be best appropriately used on 45-pound doors, 1 spring hinge, 1 standard hinge. 70-pound doors, 2 spring hinges and a regular hinge, a regular non-spring hinge. 90-pound doors, 3 spring hinges. Now, you can mix and match this with other hinges of the same width, 3.5 inch when laid open, and the same material thickness. Okay? You can indeed mix and match this because the vertical axis of pivoting is going to be compatible with non-spring hinges, but you'll certainly want to use a ball bearing hinge if you're going to mix and match. You're going to want your spring hinge locations to be at the top as a last resort. The last position you'll put a spring hinge will be in the top position because the top hinge actually carries 70% of the door weight, and that in that position, when the hinge is really just trying to do 70% of the work of hanging the door, it's going to be less effective at actually closing the door. So middle, bottom, assuming there will be 2, and then third at the very end. Now, I'm a fan of all spring hinges, and it's not because I'm a spring hinge salesman. It's because I've installed spring hinges, set spring hinges, troubleshot, reset, try to figure out why they're not working and then make them work scenario. Spring hinges are not a way to control a door. They're simply a way to try to get the door closed. You'll notice that this hinge has the Hager logo on it. That's normal. You'll notice that it also has some information stamped on the hinge, listed, 426-R, closer body, etc. Spring hinges, when used on fire-rated doors, and yes, you could have an 1 3/8 fire-rated door, which a 3.5 inch hinge would work on, by the way, would be the appropriate size for. Spring hinges, by code, must be listed, meaning they've been tested, and proof of that is on file at the testing laboratory. And evidence of that must be labeled, means the product must physically bear a label. Spring hinges carry that obligation to be labeled, not only listed. Door closers or ball bearing hinges that you use on a fire door, they don't have to be labeled, but they do have to be listed. You just don't have to see it visually. But with spring hinges, you do have to, because there are spring hinges that are not listed at all, which means they've never been tested under the environment or the testing criteria of an actual burn scenario for a fire door. So do not ever use non-listed, non-labeled spring hinges on a fire-rated door, because you don't know if it's going to close the door. That's the bottom line. Now, before we get into quantity of spring hinges, the size, 3.5 inch is the height. 3.5 inch is the width. This is a 3.5 by 3.5. The important thing to know about that is the height is the first dimension. With hinges, it's always the first dimension. With doors, the height is the second dimension. You do need to understand the height is first on a hinge. Why? Well, not all hinges are square. You could have a 4.5 by 4 spring hinge. It's really important when you're prepping the door and frame to know that 4.5 is this dimension, 4 inches this dimension. When you've got square hinges, you can kind of get away without knowing it, but you don't want to not understand it when you're dealing with rectangular hinges. I could sell you hinges that are 8 inch tall by 6 inch wide. You'd really want to know which is the height, is the bottom line. Now, quantity of spring hinges, I am a fan of selling all spring hinges when it makes sense, because it gives you better ability to actually accomplish the task of closing the door. Springs are nothing other than increase tension, and then release, and then release. Increase tension, and then release. The bottom line is, the proper way to control a door is to control it. Hydraulic surface overhead closers, surface concealed, overhead concealed closers, floor closers, they can hydraulically control a door from the latch portion of the closing cycle, from the sweep portion. They can give you back check. They can give you delayed action. That's the way that you control the opening. With a spring, you're just, let it go. And you're hoping that it closes. If you have a residential application where you have a 3-flat building and an intercom to an electric strike, the tenants or the condo owners, they're going to want to make sure that front door is locked. They don't want just anyone walking in, ever, at all. Spring hinges need to be reliably closing and latching that door, and that's really the hallmark. The 2 cardinal rules of fire doors, self-closing and self-latching. Spring hinges, in my opinion, are okay if that's how you want to ensure that a fire door is going to close. I don't think it's a good idea. Giving yourself more spring hinges is better only because you will have more potential stored energy on the springs every time the door opens because you've got more springs. When that door opens, you know, you've got to overcome not only the weight of the door, the square footage, all the air that you're moving out of the way of the door as it closes, overcome the friction of the latch bolt hitting the strike plate, overcoming, you know, an improper installation. What if your jamb is kicked out like this and then towed, and your door is actually coming through the closing cycle moving in an upward fashion? Not good ways to control the door, but they're very common. Give yourself as many advantages as possible. If you're not sure if you should have 1 or 2 or 2 or 3, I would say go to the next, you know, quantity. The issue with Hager selling them in multiples of 2, you might have a spare on hand. If you're 1 or 2, well, that's easy. Go with 2 because you got to buy 2 anyway. And that's the bottom line. Now, there is a link below this video to the template, which will show you the location of the holes for the screws and the other, all 6 of the variants of the residential spring hinge, as it addresses the corner type. You'll notice that the 1750 and 1760 are the same hinges. The 1760, the RC 1761, the RC 1762 is the same as the 1750, 51, 52, except that the base material is stainless steel. That's the only difference. You can do square corner, 1/4 inch radius, 5/8 radius. That's the other 3 options. Everything else is the same. Then we have a link to the installation instructions, and that is included with your hinge. Hager has a system by which you will insert the Allen wrench. For every order you place for spring hinges, you'll get an Allen wrench. For every hinge that you order, you'll get a tension pin. This client ordered 2 hinges, naturally. When the tension collar, this Allen wrench, you'll notice there's not one here. When that's pointed towards the top of the door, you're going to insert that down into the hole, into the Allen wrench. You're going to turn it clockwise. As you do so, you reveal new additional holes. It's into one of those new additional holes, those newly presented holes, that you'll insert the tension pin. The installation instructions are quite clear, and I'm not going to just read them. The bottom line is you'll set your tension, middle and bottom, go to the 3rd hinge last, but make sure there's tension on all of them. If you're going to 90 degree, 4 holes of tension, and I don't believe that the quantity of holes are listed, but I generally find that 4 holes of tension to 90 degree, oh yeah, it does say that, caution number 3. 4 holes of tension to 90, 3 holes of tension if you go past 90. Caution 3. If you hear contorting on the hinge, whoa, back off, turn that down. You don't want to snap the spring. If you hear a loud snap, yep, and you'll hear it when you open the door naturally. So don't overdo it. They do break. Hager spring hinges are incredibly robust, and when I hear someone breaking a spring hinge, I'm thinking, you must have had 8 holes of tension set on it, because that's the only time I've heard of that happening. And at the end of the day, if you can't get the door closed with spring hinges, you're using a toothbrush to replace spark plugs. It's the wrong tool. So use a door closer, a proper hydraulic door closer, of which, of course, Hager can sell you, and we can help you get the right one headed in your way. So the installation instructions go over all of that. You can also buy tension pins and tension rods separately. Hager does sell those kits, and we can supply you with them. We do have clients call us up and say, man, I lost the pins. And advice has been given in the past where people have been told, take a case-hardened nail and cut it and insert that in there. That'll probably work. The problem with that is it's not the way the installation instructions call for it to be installed. That on its own, believe it or not, is going to render it no longer permissible for use on a fire-rated door. Number 2, this is a true story. I had an attorney call me one time and ask me about tension pins in hinges and what my thoughts were on how the carpenter, if the carpenter used something that wasn't originally intended. Apparently there was a lawsuit because a child in a fitting room leaned up against the back of the door on the pull side and just tried, started to slide down, just coming to the child's knees and getting down onto the floor, and literally gouged their back because someone used a case-hardened nail, left a very sharp point out there. You'll notice that these tension pins are, they're chamfered. They're not straight cut pins. You can take that and run that over your hand, and while it's not pleasant, you won't break the skin with it. At least I wouldn't push it so hard as to do that. So be mindful to not use aftermarket solutions, even though you can stick something in there and it will hold tension as long as it doesn't bend. It does run afoul of the way it's intended to be installed. Obviously, in that case, presenting a dangerous application, and certainly one that is not the way it's tested. When it comes to fire door inspections, the fallback position, here's the question. Is the door closer, if the door closer is fire rated and permitted for use on a fire door, if I don't have the plastic cover installed, is it still a listed and labeled product for use, for approved use on a fire door? The answer is it's not. Now, in a fire test, that heat within about 3 or 4 minutes gets to 1800 degrees. Okay, plastic is gone. Plastic's going to melt really fast. The fallback position, though, is what do the instructions say? The instructions say to install the cover, and that's the fallback position. So install the stuff the way that Hager is giving it to you, and anything outside of that is, all bets are off in terms of it being compliant. Finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Hager products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have any questions on the Hager, number 1750 Hinge, and it's available in your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your oil rubbed, satin polished, naturally, or any other Hager product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.